أزهر العجائب.
Okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. وصلى الله على سيدنا مولانا حبيب الله العالمين أبو القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على القوم الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين إلى يوم الدين. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah to everyone who is listening, and welcome back to the Nahjal Balagha book club. This is the second session for this group, the main group, inshallah, on Wednesdays. And we set ourselves a very helpful framework last week, if you remember. For those of you who weren't here, I'll give you a catch up. We agreed that this book of Nahjal Balagha that we have, it is important and it contains great depth and multiple themes. And whilst we understand that these are the words of the Imam, we have not done enough in our lives to build a relationship with this book. Maybe you have, but most of us and the ulama argue that even they have not done justice to this book. So we need to take active steps to improve our relationship to the book of Nahjal Balagha, to the words of the Imam. And this book club, which we have inshallah, is an opportunity for us to do that. We have the chance in this book club to choose a different theme of the words of Imam Ali as represented in the book of Nahjal Balagha each week, and engage directly with his words to understand that theme. So that now I'm relying directly on the words of the Imam. It is not a other person, it's not another scholar, it's not majlis, it's not even the words of a friend. These are the words of the Imam talking directly to you. And because it's a book club, it means that all of us have the chance to read the words of Imam Ali Islam directly. Sermon 1 is what we said we will begin with. We agreed that let us find a theme each week, inshallah, a different theme of the Imam which he teaches, which is important to our faith. And the first one is Tawheed. And so if you recall, last week I asked if everyone can read Sermon 1 of Nahjul Balagha, arguably the most famous sermon, definitely the most well read because people often read the beginning and then they might stop later on. And if you want to know how Imam Ali alayhi salam looks at certain concepts, you will go to Nahjul Balagha, Sermon 1. It is a container for so many perspectives from the Imam. I hope, inshallah, you have your Nahjul Balagha with you, or you are able to read alongside. Maybe it will be easier to follow some of the concepts we're discussing, because if you allow, we will go deep, inshallah. We'll go deep into how Imam Ali alayhi salam looks at Allah. The way of the structure of today's program is I'm going to read through Sermon 1. I'm going to pause at certain moments to reflect on some of the messages of the Imam and the views of different ulama about that part of Nahjul Balagha, and I'll ask you if there are any questions. And every time I pause and I ask a question, you can feel free to unmute, to raise your hand in this chat, to write in the Zoom chat. If you're following live on, I don't know if it's on Facebook or on YouTube or any of them live, you can comment then. One of the moderators will see that comment and let me know here, inshallah. That is, inshallah, our structure. And at the end, I will ask all of you a question or two to see if we have learned from what the Imam has been teaching. Okay, and you can choose to consider it or not, inshallah. Okay, let us begin, inshallah, with Sermon 1. Now, Sermon 1 has many different themes, okay? In the beginning, first of all, Imam Ali Islam discusses who is Allah. How do I thank him? How do I speak about him? What are his qualities? He then moves on to certain proofs of things that Allah has created. So, for example, there is the creation of the world, the creation of angels, the creation of the human being, and the implementation of Islam. So now we look at certain fiqh concepts like what is the purpose of Hajj? Why does God send prophets? Why is there Quran? Hopefully, by the end of the sermon, the person has a well-rounded, holistic view of what is the Islam of Ali bin Abi Talib. Who is the Allah of Ali bin Abi Talib? What is the Quran in the eyes of Ali bin Abi Talib? For us, we're interested in the first question, which is, who is Allah in the eyes of Ali bin Abi Talib? Let us go through the Sermon 1 of Nahjul Balagha to unpack some of the ideas of Tawheed and the philosophy of God in the eyes of Ali. Okay, inshallah, if I have your permission and if you are with me, let us begin. The sermon begins, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillahi alladhi la yablughu midhatul qa'ilun. Arguably, one of the most fantastic ways of beginning a speech. All praise be to Allah, whose worth cannot be described by speakers. وَلَا يُحْصِي نَعْمَاءَهُ الْعَادُونَ, whose bounties cannot be counted by those who count, by calculators. وَلَا يُعَدِّي حَقَّهُ الْمُجْتَهِدُونَ, he whose claim to obedience cannot be satisfied by those who attempt to do so. الَّذِي لَا يَدْرُكُ بَعْدَ الْهِمَمِ, he whom the height of intellectual courage cannot reach. وَلَا يُنَالَهُ غَوْصُ الْفِطَنِ, he who the divine understandings cannot reach and for whom no description is laid down. الذي لا يدرك بعد الهمم ولا يناله غوص الفتن الذي ليس لصفته حد محدود ولا نعت موجود ولا وقت معدود. He's the one for whom no eulogy exists, no time is ordained, and no duration is fixed. فطر الخلائق بقدرته, and so he brought forth creation through his power. ونشر الرياح برحمته, and he dispersed the winds from his compassion. ووتد بصخور ميادان أرضه, and he made firm this shaking earth with rocks. Let's pause right here because these are some heavy, heavy lines from Amir al-Mu'mineen. He begins with hamd. Now, all of us begin our life with hamd, our prayer with hamd. Many sermons begin with hamd because we begin by thanking Allah. But hamd is a very specific way of thanking Allah. It's not shukr, it's not madh, it's hamd. Hamd is when you thank someone for their nature. Madh, if you do madh of someone, it's something which they have done, some voluntary action which they did to you. Shukr is when someone does a favor for you and you say, ashkur, I'm grateful for what you have done for me. But hamd is when you thank someone's essence for what they have done for you and for what they are, for their nature. So right now, before we even mention what Allah done for me, done for you, I'm just thanking Him for what He is. But it is impossible to thank Him completely. الذي لا يبلغ منه القائلون. Those who speak will not be able to finish describing him. وَلَا يُحْصِي نَعْمَهُ الْعَادُونَ, and those who count can't finish counting him, and those who are striving for this task of describing mujtahidun, they're going to fail. Already there are three ideas the Imam has mentioned, three groups and three methods which are just insufficient for knowing God. Those who talk, قائلون. You can't finish speaking the blessings of Allah Azza wa Jal. Those who count, aadun, you can't finish counting the blessings of Ali ibn Talib. And those who try hard and strive, mujtahidun, they can't do it either. By here, mujtahid, we mean those who try hard. We don't mean ulama, we mean mujtahid, in the one who strives. But none of these methods are sufficient in knowing God. This is very important. Qa'ilun means no matter how much you speak, even if you were to speak for an eternity, as we're going to come to, it's not enough time to mention everything of God because even the tongue is limited in this task. Adun, if you choose, okay, maybe not speaking, I will choose numbers. I will try and count every blessing of the Imam. It won't work. For when Allah says to Nabi Musa, ala Nabina Musa, thank me as I deserve to be thanked. Nabi Musa in his perplexity answers, Allah, how can I thank you for everything you have done? How can I thank you as you deserve when I'm not even equal to this task? And Allah says, exactly what I'm paraphrasing. By knowing you cannot complete my thanks, you have thanked me how I deserve. All you need to do is acknowledge you can't finish. And then you try. This is why our sixth Imam says, Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salam says, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ajil farjum, that you will never be able to do justice to the thanks of God. Because every time you thank Him once, you will then need to thank Him another time for being able to thank Him the first time. And those of you who are better than me at maths, which I will assume as all of you, know that if you keep going on and on and on, you have an infinite cycle in which you never finish the task of thanking Allah, which is, of course, the thing which Imam alayhi salam is saying is impossible. You will never finish. Some people might try, but they should know some things about when you thank Allah. Why is it that you just can't finish? Because He is eternal. الَّذِي لَا يَدْرُكُ بَعْدَ الْحِمَمِ, the height of intellectual courage cannot reach Him. وَيَنَالَهُ غَوْصُ الْفِتَنِ الَّذِي لَيْسَ لِصِفَتِهِ حَدٌّ مَحْدُودٌ. The height of your aql will not be able to help you in this task. If you think, okay, let me go to my mind and hopefully let me try with my mind, my aql, to delve as deep as I can into the depths of the knowledge of God, of ma'rifah, it's not enough. Many people think that because of how much Quran specifies on ya'qalun and tafakkur and using your mind and thinking, that maybe this is the best way of knowing God, or the only way, they might say. The philosophers will argue this. A person who believes in philosophy argues that knowledge is the most important thing in understanding something's existence. You have to gain knowledge of the mind, rationality. And they will argue that Nahjal Balagha, the words of the Imam, all these things need to be understood in a rational way. Now, rationality is important, but what the Imam is saying is it is not enough to know all of Allah. It's an approach, but it's not complete, because Allah is beyond the minds of even the one who is Ba'd al-Himam, the greatest describer. He's beyond their mind. And so, even if you choose, I'm going to go through being smart and intellectual, that will not be enough. Rather, the one who knows Allah combines the mind with the heart. For they say to the Imam, are you worshipping a Lord that you cannot see? And he says, how can I worship a Lord that I don't see? I see him with the eyes of the heart. So it's as if in this khutbah, Imam Ali is trying to tell all of us, think about Allah, ponder on Allah, but make sure that you allow your heart to know him, because your mind is not enough in this task. Okay. Wala na'tun mawjood. There is no description which exists already that you and I might copy and just read that description like it's a script of knowing God. It doesn't exist because it cannot exist. There is no description, because every description that we have is a had, is a limit. If you describe something, you have assigned on it a limit, because you've said, okay, this thing can exist in this many words or this many characters. And the moment you decide how much it takes to know something, you have limited its knowledge. And every name is like this. Every name is a limit. I use my name and you use your name and we use our names in order to identify ourselves. But the name is a label on us, and each label is a limitation on us. If we look at Allah like this, that I'm going to mention his names and his qualities, I will have limited him. I'm going to come to this concept a little bit later about why the names of Allah are not enough to know him. But the Imam says, you cannot finish describing him. You will not come to the end of that description. Whether it is the description of the philosophers in saying Allah has wujud and mahiyya, or Allah has this sifa and that sifa, it's not sufficient to know all of Allah. There is more which lies beyond understanding. And you might think that the problem is in me, but it's also the problem is in my mind. So it's not just that I'm not trying hard enough. My mind, even if worked to its absolute optimum, cannot know Allah the way he is. And the reason for this is because Allah is eternal. وَلَا مَقْتٌ وَلَا وَقْتٌ مَعْدُودٌ. There is not enough time which has been ordained for me to finish praising Allah, because he is eternal. He is awwal wal akhir wal zahir wal batin. Allah is the first and the last, the manifest and the hidden. He is encapsulating many names which are eternal. And Imam alayhi salam is using this word of la waqt al ma'dud to show that you don't have enough time, because he is free from time. Allah, there are many words we use to describe the eternality of Allah. Like, what word is the best word for God being eternal? Some say sarmad. Qul huwallahu ahad, Allahu samad. He's eternal in that way. Okay. Some say azal. Allah has azaliyah because it means he has no time affecting him. Others say khulud. Hum fiha khalidun. I'll be in this situation for all eternity. Allah is Khalid. All of these words, although they have different meanings, by the way, subtly different meanings, which if you ask me, I can explain, they mean one thing, which is Allah is free from time. So how can me, who is subject to time, know the one who is free from time? And this is Ali ibn Abi Talib's point. You can't know one who is eternal when you are one who is limited. And this point he continues in explaining. He then describes what Allah has done for us, a little sample of what is to come later on in the sermon. So he mentions in this example, فَطَرَ الْخَلَائِقُ بِقُدْرَتِهِ. He creates, he established this earth, he ordained, created this earth through his power, through his qudra. وَنَشْرَ الرِّيَاحَ بِرَحْمَتِهِ. And he dispersed the winds from his mercy. The winds, which is mentioned many times in our Quran and Ahadith, is an example of something which you cannot control, but which can control you. The winds, as they are dispersed, are responsible for creation. As we relate in Nahjal Balagha, the winds are responsible for sustenance. The winds are rizq. The winds are the system of this earth. And all of it is controlled by Allah Azza wa Jal. And Allah is the one who makes firm the shaking earths with rocks. When you think of our life and the stability that we have, We live a stable life because we rely on certain things which we take for granted, like the fixedness of this earth, the operation of time, the day and the night, all these processes. Allah is the one who made them firm. So submit yourself to Him. Okay, here I'll pause very quickly. Are there any questions or comments about this part so far anyone would like to make before I continue? If yes, please write them now or unmute yourself, inshallah. If not, I will continue, inshallah. There'll be other opportunities to ask questions if anything's not clear. But so far, I think it's good. The main theme is قائلون عادون مجتهدون, cannot finish praising Allah. You can't finish talking about Him enough. You can't finish counting His blessings, and you can't finish trying hard and striving because He is eternal and His description is unknowable fundamentally. Even if you use your mind, it's not enough. Okay. A person may then ask a question, which is, if it's true that Allah is so far and so amazing and perfect in this sense, what can I do? What is the point of religion in the first place? And Imam alayhi salam, for the one who wants to answer that question, continues in the next way. The foremost in religion in deen is the one who gains ma'rifah of Him. It's beautiful. وَكَمَالُ الْمَعْرِفَتِهِ تَصْدِيقُ بِهِ. And the perfection of gaining ma'rifah of Him, of knowing Him, is testifying Him. وَكَمَالُ تَصْدِيقُ بِهِ. And the perfection of testifying of who He is, التوحيده, is acknowledging His tawheed, His oneness. وَكَمَالُ تَوحيده الْإِخْلَاصُ لَهُ. And the perfection of knowing His tawheed is knowing His purity, is having that purity for Him and having ikhlas with Him. وَكَمَالُ إِخْلَاصِ لَهُ نَفْيُ صِفَاتِهِ عَنْهُ. This is very important. And this is one of the secrets of the first sermon of Imam Ali alayhi salam. The perfection by which we mean the ultimate thing we should be seeking. The perfection of having a pure knowledge of God is to deny and disregard from Him His attributes. Deny them. Why, you might ask you? كل صفته أنه غير موصوف. وشهادة كل موصوف أنه غير الصفة. Because every attribute is a proof of Him, is different to Him. And He is different to the attribute you are giving to Him. Every time you mention an attribute, that's something of Him, but it's not Him, which I'll go through inshallah later. So the purity is to know Him attributes from Him. وَمَنْ وَصَفَ اللَّهُ سُبْحَانَهُ فَقَدْ قَرَنَ. Whoever tries to give an attribute to Allah and say that they can describe Him, they will say they recognize Him. وَمَنْ قَرَنَهُ فَقَدْ ثَنَّاهُ. And the one who recognizes Him, recognizes His like or His partner. وَمَنْ ثَنَّاهُ فَقَدْ جَزَّهُ. And the one who recognizes that he has a partner, recognizes he has a part to Him. These are the words of Ali ibn Abi Talib. وَمَنْ جَزَّهُ فَقَدْ جَحَلَهُ. And the one who recognizes he has a part to Him, recognizes that they are ignorant of Him. They don't know Him. وَمَنْ جَحَلَهُ. The one who doesn't know Him, فَقَدْ أَشَارَهُ عَلَيْهِ. They just did ishara of Him. They just pointed to Him. وَمَنْ أَشَارَ عَلَيْهِ فَقَدْ حَدَّهُ. And the one who tried pointing at Allah made a limit for Him. وَمَنْ حَدَّهُ فَقَدْ عَدَّهُ. And the one who admitted a limit for Him, the one who tried to number Him, the one who admitted a limit for Him, numbered Him. وَمَنْ قَالَ فِيمَا. And so the one who said, where is He contained in? فَقَدْ ضَمَّنَهُ. They held that He can be contained. وَمَنْ قَالَ عَلَامَ. And the one who said, on what is He? What is He on? Meaning, what is His maqam on? فَقَدْ أَخَلَّ مِنْهُ. They said that He can be on something. So they have also limited Him. Gradually going through, we have seen that if you want, that's the end of this part of the sermon. If you want to know God, you have to go through certain rational steps. And it might be that me and you had certain ideas about Allah which we thought are true. But here comes Ali bin Abi Talib in Nahjal Balagha and changes our view to decondition our mind from false understandings of Allah, so that we can open the mind to gaining the true reality of Allah. It's a process. And it's as if Imam Ali Islam wants you to go through a process of continually perfecting your mind. Kamal al-awwal, kamal al-akhir, kamal al-akhir, kamal al-ba'd. Each imperfection perfects something else, something else, something else. And if you come to this religion saying, I want deen, like I want it, Imam is saying the first thing you have to do is acknowledge him, accept him. We say, fine, I accept Allah. I accept him. He's my Lord. I acknowledge this. Then you have to go one step further. You have to acknowledge that he is one. That has to be the starting point, that Allah is one. And when we say Allah, we mean him, not my idea of him. Okay? Because we're using all these arguments, we want to know the real Allah who exists outside of us, not the idea that I have learned from this scholar or my parents or this book or my own understanding. No, the real Allah exists far from my own interpretation. That's why La ilaha illallah, one of the meanings, as Allama Tabatabai explains, is that there is no deity worthy of worship who exists in the real world except Allah. I might have a fake God in my mind who I think is God, but that was never him. Imam is saying, if you want to testify him, know him. Again, ma'rifah of his tawheed. وكمال التوحيد به الإخلاص به. You should have sincerity and try to know him purely and know his purity. Meaning, I don't attach any idea to him which is wrong. I want to get this right. And I want to make my foundation strong. والكمال الإخلاص له نفي صفاته عنه. The perfection of knowing God purely is to deny him from his attributes. Salbiya, denying. This is so important. Allah is Rahman, Allah is Rahim, Allah is Qadir, Allah is Mutlaq, Allah has all of these things. He has all of these qualities. Question, where do these qualities actually exist? Where do they exist? Do they exist in Allah or somewhere else? Now, if we say that they exist in Allah, we've said Allah has different parts, 99 parts, which when they come together makes one whole Allah. But this is a problem because we're looking at Allah as different juz, as different parts which work together, which implies that you can take one part away and put one part back. And Allah is not like this, for he is needless. He has no need of his parts. He has no need for one name to link with another name, to link with another name. This view is not right. Allah is not like a machine which has different parts which come together. But then we say, well, I believe that Allah is merciful. I have grown up hearing that he's merciful. But then the person might say, okay, but where is his mercy? Is his mercy in his essence or somewhere else? And the answer is, Imam Ali is saying, don't say it's in his essence. Don't say it's in Allah, because then you've limited him. His qualities must exist somewhere else, and his qualities exist in his actions and in our understanding of his actions. This is important because now we are admitting that all of the names of Allah, all of the names exist in the mind. They are just mental interpretations of him. But his true reality is far away from these. I'll give you one example just to explain this point. Childbirth. The example of a child being born represents Allah as being Khaliq, he's the creator. Okay. Represents he is Ar-Rahman, because he is for his mercy is giving you a child. Represents his power because he has the ability to give life, and he is Al-Hayy because if something has life, the one who gives life must have it to give it to them. So if something is born with life, Allah must himself have life which he gives. For example, Allah breathed into Adam from his ruh. At least one meaning means Allah must have been living, Al-Hayy, to give life. Okay. All of these qualities exist in the action of Allah giving a child. Now, if Allah did not give that child, is he any less of a creator? No. Is he any less merciful if he didn't give you a child? No, his mercy is the same. It doesn't change, doesn't increase or decrease. Is he any less alive if he doesn't give life? No, his life exists in his essence. That's because Allah's essence is different to everything else. His actions are of how his essence interacts with us. And it's in those actions we see a glimpse of who he is, of how he acts, of his personality, of his character. By personality, I mean the personality of his actions. But Imam Ali Islam is saying, wa nafyu. Deny him, his essence from these things. Don't say he is these things. Say these are attributed to him. Remember the priority. Allah is not mercy. We attribute mercy back to him to try and understand him. But he is all of these qualities and more at once, at one time. It's only we who see him in time and say these are different attributes, that there are 99 of them. No, in reality, there is only one essence. And Tawheed, which is Kamal or Tasdeeq bih, true Tawheed, is to acknowledge there is only one essence of Allah, one wajibul wujud, one being who exists. Everything else is our way of understanding him, but he comes first. I hope this point has been made clear about the attributes. There are a few questions about this which I will go through. One is sent to me directly, which is question: why do we need to get intellectual intelligence if we will never fully understand Allah? Excellent question, and this is an important point. Actually, if it's possible, I'll come back to this question because it links to a point I want to make later. Another question: what exactly is the difference in understanding him and the idea of him? A good question which I will answer now. What's the difference between Allah and the idea of Allah? Can you hear me? Because it's saying I'm muted. Can someone just comment and say that that you can hear me? Just so I know, please.
Yeah, we can hear you. No worries. Go ahead.
Can someone just say that you can hear me, please? Or can you write in the message that you
Boss,
can hear me, just so I know?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can
Thank
hear
you. Thank you so much. Okay. What's the difference between Allah and the idea of Allah? Okay. Allah is his essence. His essence exists without me, with no needs for me, with no one with any idea of him. The tasawwur, the idea of Allah, only exists when there is someone to know him. That's why we say Allah, in Hadith Qudsi, we have a hadith which Allah says, I created you lita'arafu, so that you may know me. That's the first time Allah there's a version of an idea of Allah in anyone's mind. When there was the first person who existed, or the first angel, or the first being. That's the idea of Allah, and it's completely rational and mental. It has no reality, the idea of Allah. It's just a mental idea. Allah's essence is him, just him. Laysa kamithlihi shay, nothing like him. Everything else is an idea of him. My view of him, the words tawheed, aqaid, aqidah, adl, rahm, sifa, all these things are just ideas. And Imam Ali is saying in Nahjal Balagha that you need to try and understand him, but don't say that he is what your idea of him tells you. Those two things are different. Because if you say, وَقَالَ فِيمَا, what is he in? Like, is he in my mind? Is he in this place, in that place? You've limited him, and he can't be in a thing. He's separate from your prepositions. وَمَنْ قَالَ عَلَامَ, if you say, okay, maybe he's on something, like he's on this maqam or this place or this idea, but then you've also limited him as being linked to something else. The mind is playing tricks on you. Ali ibn Abi Talib is saying, don't allow your mind to rationalize him. Just acknowledge you can't know the extent of him. So that's one of the important points. Another question, I hope that answers the brother, inshallah. When we say something can't be done easily, it doesn't mean it's impossible, as Allah has created us and loves us. He can grant anyone the power to get close to him. Isn't this the power of Tawheed Af'aliyah or Fi'liyah? So Tawheed Fi'liyah, as Brother Ali Jafri is mentioning, is the belief in our aqaid that Allah has actions. He has fi'l. And his fi'l is when his essence, his true reality, in his wisdom, he decides to do an action, like create. And in that creation, he does something. The question is saying that in Allah's creation, he's granting anyone the power to get close to him. This is a correct observation, Brother Ali, that you're right. In the fi'l of Allah is a chance, just one chance that we have in this life to know him. If it wasn't for Allah creating us and giving us wisdom and actions, we would be lost because our minds can't know him. But we can at least try. And it's in linking ourselves to Allah and gaining ma'rifah and going through the steps the Imam mentions that we can perform actions to touch him and to reach him. In the next section of Nahjal Balagha, I will go through some themes about how we can know Allah according to this question. Okay, but you're right. The actions of Allah are a way to know him. Let me return to the earlier question, which was, why do we need to gain intellectual intelligence of Allah if we can never fully understand him? There are some people who believe that because Allah is impossible, you can't know him. You can't gain knowledge of him. There's no point even trying. The Ash'arites had a belief like this, where they believed in the early part of Islam that because Allah is so essentially unknowable that you can't know him, that maybe we can know certain attributes of him, like his mercy and kindness, but we can't know him. And so we should not apply our mind to this task, which is why, by the way, this sermon of Nahjal Balagha, sermon 1, some people don't believe in reading and using it to understand Allah, because we shouldn't use these theological, philosophical approaches to know God. Even though the Imam is speaking it, they say our minds can't understand it. This idea also extended to some akhbari thoughts between the 5th and 10th centuries after Hijrah. 5th and 10th meaning um, like centuries. Akhbaris believe this point too, where there was the belief that the knowledge of Allah and the words of Ahlul Bayt and meaning of Quran is so far from our understanding, we should only rely on that khabar we've received and not think about it a little bit further and not do much more personal intellectualization of it because it's limited. However, as Allama Tabatabai explains, we are not saying that the mind is sufficient in knowing God. We are saying that if I'm going to go on a journey to try to know God, I should use the mind to understand that which can be known. Allama says this. If I'm going to go on this journey, I want to go on it in a certain way. What's the best way of trying to know God? Allama Tabatabai explains that aql, your rationality, is a good tool in knowing God. That's it. It's a tool. It is limited. It can't do everything, but it can reach you to a certain point. And that point, as we're mentioning, is at the very least, nafyu sifati anhu, just to deny him from wrong ideas. And one of the brothers, I gave this session, a similar session to students yesterday. One of them messaged me after and said, is the meaning that we should try and free our minds from wrong ideas to allow our hearts to accept right ideas? And this is a very good way of putting it. That's the point to the dear brother. We are doing this so that we can take away wrong notions in the mind so that we are more open to receiving the truth from Allah when it comes. Another question has come in now, which is, what is the essence of Allah? What is the dhat of Allah? Very good question. Again, Ash'arites had a certain view that the essence of Allah is his attributes. We say that if there was nothing except Allah, that is his essence. If there's nothing else but him, if you believe that there was a time before, if there was a time before we existed, before there was angels, before the world, there was just Allah, that's his essence. It's not an idea of him, it's just his own reality, which is laysa kamithlihi shay, which is something which is like no other. We cannot know the essence of God. We can just know some very foundational things. For example, we know it exists because we can prove it by saying Allah is wajibul wujud. He's the being who has he's the necessary existence because he has no need for a cause. Not just that. He exists, he's wajib, he has to exist, not just because he has no cause, but because by his own nature, there has to be a being like him which can exist, a being which has life, a being which has reality. It must exist by his own essence. I don't want to go too deep, but some philosophers argue that there are two. There is the essence of Allah and the mahiyya, the nature, the quality of Allah. And the essence of Allah is that thing which can be proved by wajib al-wujud, which is separate to everything else. Similarly, like I mentioned, if there was a time when there was only Allah and nothing else, even now there is only Allah and nothing else. There's nothing else, there's just Allah. Everything else would exist, us and everything. We don't exist in the same way that he exists unlimited. We need a cause, someone's got to make us, something needs to describe us, we need something to come together to become an effect of a cause, but Allah is free from all of these processes. He's the only one who actually exists truly. We are like a dream in the knowledge of God, but God is the one who exists ultimately. So thank you for the question, sister. I hope that answers, inshallah. So we need to understand Allah is not his attributes, they are just in my mind. These are just ways I'm trying to know him. But as Imam Ali Islam says, if you try to know him, know that you cannot finish knowing him through the mind. Okay. Are there any other questions on this point before we continue? You can unmute or you can comment. Okay, inshallah. If not, let's continue. Let's go one level further, if you allow me. in Imam alayhi salam's beautiful description of Allah Azza wa Jal. So far, we know where we're at. Ka'inun la an hadath. He is a being, but he did not come into being. Wow. Mawjoodun la an adam. He's mawjood, he exists, but he did not come from non-existence. مع كل شيء لا بمقارنة. He exists with everything, but not in physical nearness to it. وغير كل شيء. And he is separate from everything, لا بمزايلة, but without being separated from it. فاعل لا بمعنى الحركات والعلة. He acts, he does fi'l, like Ali said, Brother Ali. He does actions, but without any need for movement or instrument. No haraka, no ila. Basirun, he sees. إذ لا منظر عليه من خلقه. Even when there is nothing whom there is to see, or that can see him, sorry. Or where there is none to be looked at from his creation, he still sees. متوحد, he is one. إذ لا سكن يستأنس به ولا يستوحش بفقده. He is one being, even when there is none who exists who will keep him company or will miss him when they are gone. So let's stop again for a second because we're going very deep. Allah Azza wa Jal exists. We are accepting he is a being, but he didn't come into being from something else. He wasn't huduth, he wasn't created like all of us. We are amongst the hadatha, those things which came into being. Allah's not like that. The Imam even Imam says in Sermon 152 in Nahjal Balagha that this idea that Allah did not come into being, if we look at how we came into being, it's a proof that Allah didn't come into being, because we needed something to create us, we needed something for us to emerge from, and we can reflect on a time when there was no us and then there was us. But Allah is not like that, for there was no time when he didn't exist. He's mawjoodun la an adama. He exists without coming from non-existence. There is no non-existence for Allah. There is just his wujud, just his existence. He is just wujud. And so the philosophers, they say, Allah is bas haq. He's just the reality. There's nothing else. Here's the important point for us to take away. Ma'a kulli sha'in. He's with everything. He's with all beings. نحن أقرب من حبل الوريد. He's closer to you than your jugular vein. قالوا أنا أقرب, I'm close. لا بمقارنة, but he is not mixed with you, or he's not in part of your physical nature. He's not part of you, but he's close to you. We'll go through what that means later. وغيره, and he's different لكل شيء. He's also separate from all beings. He's not part of us. لا بمزايلة, but he is not separated from us. Okay. Some ulama argue that this is a little bit confusing. Actually, I'm arguing it's confusing. Some ulama argue this is an explanation of Allah when he says, Ana awwal wal akhir wal zahir wal batin. Allah is first and last. Or he's the first and the last. And he's the manifest and he's the hidden. All at once. Why? Why is it at one point Allah is close to me, but he's not me? He's not with me and mixed with me. I'm still a free agent. And in another time, he is separate from me. He's different to me. And yet he is closer to me than my jugular vein. How can he be both things at once? How can he be both immanent to me and transcendent from me? Now, one answer, of course, is that Allah is transcendent because we can't understand him and his essence comes before us. His essence precedes us. But through his love, through his beauty, and through his actions as a fa'al, as an actor, he made us so that we may know him. And he gave us a chance to get to know him. And so although his knowledge is something which is separate from us, he gives us some knowledge of him. So he's with us in terms of we can gain knowledge of him. And he has full knowledge of us. Even though he's separate to us, he's very personal, he's very intimate to us. Another view, which might, so if that makes sense to you while I'm describing it, like sometimes it just clicks. If that clicks, alhamdulillah. Maybe this will click if that doesn't. Allah is awwal to you and akhir to you. He's first and he's last. He's first meaning he created you. He's the originator of you. He came, he is la hadath. He is mawjood. He existed before you and you came into being. But also he's akhir meaning he's with you in everything that you do. Every action you take, he's with you there. He's akhir to it. He comes after it as well as coming before it. But he does not do the action with you. You do the action. You see? Like I choose what to do. I have that freedom. Allah gives me that freedom and Allah knows what I will do. He's awwal and akhir to my fi'l, to my actions. But I'm still separate to him in that he doesn't make me do anything. I'm not forced. There's no jabr on me. And yet he knows in complete intimacy what I will and what I will not do. This is because Allah is not affected by time and I am affected by time. Time affects me. There was a time when I was born. There was a time when I will die. As Nabi Isa said in the Quran, I bear witness to the time that I was born and the time when I'll be resurrected. I bear witness. We can do this. Allah has knowledge of our time without time affecting him. Ali says in Sermon 65 of Nahjal Balagha, praise be to Allah, that nothing comes before him or after him, like time. Therefore, he is awwal before he's akhir, and he's zahir before he's batin. Allah is that being who we cannot say he was this and then he was this. He is all of it at once. He is zahir and batin at once. He's awwal and akhir at once. There's no time on him. Similarly, in Sermon 186, Imam Ali says in Nahjal Balagha that he needs no time. He's not in need of it. He's not in need of anything to be happening to him. Therefore, the Imam continues, he has his wujud without needing non-existence. And he has his azali, his pre-existing, he is eternal without needing a beginning because there's no time to be affected on him. He is both with us and separate to us. I think, adding to this, the Imam mentions these points because later on he wants us to know that Allah is always with you. And yet you cannot know everything about him. You cannot gain that ultimate reality of him. And just by accepting this, you are on the path to knowing him. The aql is limited, the mind limited, the body is limited, but Allah is unlimited. Don't let this think there's no point to religion. For, as Imam says, أَوَّلَ الدِّينُ مَعْرِفَتِهِ. The first part of religion is gaining knowledge of Allah. The foremost in deen is the one who is an arif of Allah. Don't stop and give up this task of knowing God just because it's hard to know all of him. And by accepting you can't know all of him, you have known exactly what he wants you to know about him. And he'll allow you to reveal one other veil from you for then you to realize yourself even more. فَمَنْ عَرَفَ نَفْسَهُ فَقَدْ عَرَفَ رَبَّهُ. The one who knows themselves knows their Lord. So this path of Nahjal Balagha, the path of Imam Ali alayhi salam, the path of being a Shia of Imam Ali alayhi salam is to know yourself. And it's through knowing yourself that you gain that intimate and deep and meaningful and true and pure knowledge of God. Okay, let me take a pause here to not go way too far ahead. Are there any questions or comments on this part of Nahjal Balagha or any part I've mentioned so far? Anyone want to ask anything to make clear before we move on?
Sorry, I think I've got a question. I'd rather say it, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so we're talking about people who are alive.
Sorry, Alipa, I didn't see that. Assalamu alaikum, first of all. Thank you so much for joining. Yeah, thank you. So, what's your question?
Yeah, just quickly, Imam is obviously talking to people who are alive, and there are limitations. We say when we're alive, but is there any description somewhere where it says about people who die? They get to know more, and is there a chance of knowing Allah more when someone passes away? Is there any discussion in Nahjal Balagha around that part?
So we definitely have this in the Quran, of course. where we say لا يحسبون في قتلوا في سبيل الله أموات بل أحياء عندهم ربهم بل أحياء عندهم ربهم يرزقون. That those people who have died in the way of Allah, don't say they are dead, they are still alive, أحياء, and they're receiving rizq from Allah. I've heard some commentaries say that this verse means that the rizq they're getting from Allah is continuous knowledge of Him, even after they have died. Those who have died, fi sabilillah. So that's one point. Also, we have a view in barzakh as well, that when a person goes to barzakh, there are opportunities for them to keep gaining knowledge of Allah. And so the dua we say, Rabbi zidni ilman and Rabbi zidni ma'rifatik, Allah give me knowledge and give me ma'rifah. These continue even after our death, the path of knowledge. In fact, we have another narration from the Imams which say that a child who dies before the age of not bulugh, but of maturity, in intellectual maturity in this world, the angels feed them knowledge of God in barzakh after they have passed away. Because you cannot enter into Jannah without accepting Allah. But how can a child who dies before they gain mental maturity know Allah? They are raised by angels in barzakh. So this is a general theological framework about knowledge does continue even after the grave. In terms of Ali alayhi salam, he says many times that I have more knowledge of the heavens than I do, or I have as much knowledge of the heavens and of the ground. Ask me before you lose me. And there are many opportunities in Nahj Balagha, especially in Khutbatul Gharra, the sermon of the Mu'mineen, of the Muttaqeen, which mentions that knowledge is a defining feature of the believer. So in answer to your question, Ali Bhai, in Nahj Balagha, this idea that we can know Allah is the most important fundamental concept, and it does continue after the grave. There is one of the lectures we're going to look at in this course in Nahj Balagha Book Club, which is on Irfan and Ma'rifah. We'll get there. In that session, we'll go through forms of knowledge of God that the human being can have according to Imam Ali in Nahj Balagha. And if, now that you've mentioned it, I will look for those parts of Nahj Balagha which imply or show that knowledge is for more than just life. Knowledge exists after. So inshallah, in that session, we'll go through that topic in more detail, inshallah. But thank you for your question. Thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum, brother. Hi. Assalamu
Alaikum
alaikum.
salam wa rahmatullah, brother.
Hey, assalamu alaikum. My name is Shazad. My question is, brother, from what I understand of the Nahj is the idea that the qalb has a very big meaning in the realization of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So from, I understand in Sermon 1, there is a discrepancy between the intellect and the qalb, the aql and the qalb. The idea that the aql will be able to get to a certain level, but when the qalb reaches him, when najma is hawa, like when it's two bows lengths or nearer,
Yeah,
that's the concept that we're trying to achieve, to get so close to Allah that we don't pray him because of his paradise, or we don't fear him because of his hell, but because he's worthy of worship. My question is, in terms of your reality of Nahj al-Balagha, where does the qalb fit into this reality of knowing Allah? Because Imam Ali quite eloquently mentions that you can't rationalize Allah in any way, and our faculties of reasoning can reach to a certain level, but the reality of our heart will be able to, once we love him enough, he'll be the hands that we speak, or that we move with, the feet that we walk with, the tongue that we speak with. So this reality of being close to Allah can only be understood through the heart. So is there a concept that once we laqa with Allah, once we actually liqa with Allah, and get qurbatan ilallah, what is the reality that progresses after that liqa? What is the concept and rank that you would reach in that level? I mean, there's quite sort of Sufyani, sort of like Irfani questions, but my reasoning is, when we rationalize Allah, we've done it, but then we have to get to the next level. What is the literature say in regards to ranks and possibilities after we've done a liqa?
such a beautiful question. Such a good question, brother, and thank you for asking it. I'll first answer on qalb and then liqa Allah. On qalb, you're right. The heart is a very important concept in Nahj al-Balagha, and it does come up more than once about love for God being a part of ma'rifah of Allah, being a task for the heart in addition to the mind. We're not saying, by the way, that there's not role for the mind, and neither are we saying that even in the later levels of sayr and suluk, in the path of ma'rifah of Allah, which we believe in irfan, we're not even saying that we are leaving behind the mind. Some philosophers, some scholars, especially those in the tradition of Mullah Sadra believe that the mind and the heart need to go together on this journey. Okay, so we're not taking that away from that. However, there is a clear difference between the aql and qalb. Allama Tabatabai helps us by arguing that when the Quran mentions ruh, the spirit, nafs, sometimes not nafs al-awama, but nafs and qalb, and sometimes your mind, he means the same thing. He means that non-material part of the reality, which is knowledge. And since it's non-material, its purpose is to gain more non-material. That's its function. So since it's the mind, its purpose is knowledge. This is the task of the heart. And it's a different type of knowledge than the knowledge of the mind. By mind here, I mean specifically aql. Aql, as the philosophers use it, is just for logic, rationality, and mathematical proofs. By maths, I mean logic in the strict sense. That's its purpose. How do you prove God exists? Cause, uncaused cause. Design argument. Look at the earth, look at this watch. Someone must have made this watch. Someone must make this earth. It must be Allah. Ontological argument, cosmological argument. They have an idea of Allah. It must exist. Ergo, this premise, this premise. These are all rational proofs for God. Quran mentions sanurihim ayati fil afaq wa fi anfusihim, that we show some signs in the horizons. Fine, learn them, but some signs are in yourselves. And Imam Ali Islam says that I stood at the gate of my heart and let none in except Allah, suggesting that for Imam Ali alayhi salam, the heart is where he actually knows Allah in that deep way. The mind is how he communicates this, and of course he knows Allah rationally, but for him, his focus is on building a relation to Allah from the heart. And this is why, my dear brother, this is why I think in Sermon 1, he begins by mentioning wrong ideas of Allah, so that the mind is clear from misconceptions to then allow the heart to accept these things more. Because if it's true that there are limitations on us knowing Allah, some limitations are because Allah can't be known. That's true. But some limitations is on me and my capacity and my approach. Either I've not worked on myself to gain more ma'rifah, or, and this one is more relevant to us, I might have some wrong ideas of God. Maybe before this lecture, I believe that God is his attributes. Now I know that, no, he's his essence. His attributes are ways of understanding him. Now I go through another level. So on qalb, and by the way, we are going to look at the topic of ma'rifah in Nahjal Balagha in one of the sessions, so please stay for that one. I'd love to hear your views. On qalb, it is the mechanism for gaining ma'rifah of Allah, and its path is one of love. Good. On liqa Allah, another great point. We believe at one point we will meet Allah. Some scholars see this as being evidence of physical nature of Allah, that he exists on his throne. They have the verse of Quran, Ar-Rahman al-Arsh istawa, Surah Taha, that Allah is the one who brings forth or establishes is on his throne. Some scholars believe that this meant literally on his throne. And right now we have a hadith, mainly in Sunni tradition, it has to be said in Bukhari and Muslim, which signify God has a physical body. But we do have similar narrations in our traditions which indicate Allah has a form. And one of the things we need to do is not fall into the trap of anthropomorphism. Anthropomorphism means when you assign human and animal characteristics to God, like he has a physical form. Liqa Allah, meeting Allah, the way that my teachers taught it to me, we do look at this topic in the Hawza, we studied it in tafsir, is when your heart meets Allah and when you gain more perfect knowledge of him, as much as you can bear. So this meeting is in truth a meeting of knowledge. Maybe because I've studied in the rational tradition, I'm more inclined to mention knowledge, but also love is true. Liqa Allah, meeting Allah, is when the beloved finally meets his lover. I mentioned one example of this. When Nabi Ibrahim, ala Nabina, was about to die, the angel Jibreel comes to him. The one narration says he's waiting at his door, which we have heard similar for Ahlul Bayt, or that he's waiting. So Ibrahim says, who has come? And the answer is, I am the angel of death, I've come to take your soul. So Ibrahim answers to him, what friend takes the life of another friend? If I'm Khalil, the friend, what friend does this, that you've come to take my life? And the answer from Allah in Hadith Qudsi is, which beloved does not wish to meet the lover? Or which lover does not wish to meet with the beloved? So, meeting Allah for Ibrahim is a question of love. And I believe liqa Allah is also linked to love. Inshallah, my dear brother, I hope this answers your question. And if there are more, please add. Or inshallah, in that session, I would love to hear your views. There is one comment here, which I'll quickly go through, which is, how would we know Allah by knowing ourselves? We are different from Allah. A very good question, because I mentioned the famous hadith, which also has become a precept. Man arafa nafsahu faqad arafa rabbahu. The one who knows themselves knows their Lord. So the question is, how are these things linked? Some people believe that Allah created us with a small portion of His qualities. Now, to clarify, they don't exist in Allah, these qualities, but they do exist in His actions. So, for example, you will find some of the mercy of God in yourself because you'll feel the mercy of a mother to a child, right? You'll find some of the justice of Allah in you when you are in power and about to issue a judgment to someone. And as we see in the famous letter to Malik al-Ashtar, which we're going to look at next week, by the way, little spoiler, how you treat others is linked with how Allah treats you. The scholars say that the more that you go through self-knowledge, the more you find the qualities of Allah which exist in you. And these qualities are just tools of the mind and the heart to know God. That's one approach. Another approach is to, my dear sister who asked this question, qalb, the heart is the haram of Allah, as Imam Sadiq alayhi salam says. The heart is the sanctuary of Allah. Knowing yourself means knowing your heart. Self-knowledge. And this means doing tazkiyah of your nafs, which means purifying yourself from any shahwat, desires, attractions which have made the heart their own home. Whereas the Imam says the heart is the home of Allah. The more you gain knowledge of yourself and do this process of gradual tazkiyah and takhliyah and purifying yourself and making yourself internally clean, you're opening yourself more to receive Allah. So the more you know yourself and the more you build your capacity for yourself, the more you receive from Allah, from His lutf, from His knowledge, from His ma'rifah. Because kamalul ma'rifati tasdeequ bih. The perfection, as Muhammad says in this sermon, of knowing Allah is accepting Him. Wa kamalul tasdeequ bih is ikhlas. After tawhid is ikhlas. You have to have purity and you have to know Him purely. So that's one view. Another view, which might be as helpful to you, inshallah, is that we realize that we are completely dependent on Allah. The more you think of yourself, the more you know yourself, you realize I am fully muhtaj ila al-haq. I need God. And the more you build that idea of need, you realize that He must have in Him true existence. And knowing God is a process of returning back to the origin, going back to Him, going back to the original cause, the one who has la hadath wala Adam. He doesn't emerge and he doesn't come from non-existence. So knowing your Lord means going backwards to where you came from. Ya ayyuhatan nafs al-mutma'inna irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyah. Come back to me, O tranquil soul. You've reached the level of mardiyah, of tranquility. Now you get to return back to me and know me the way that I wish to be known. Inna ilayhi raji'un. فَتَرْجُعُ إِلَى اللَّهِ. Turn back towards God. It's such a common theme in the Quran and in Nahjal Balagha. So I hope, inshallah, that answers your question. And again, if there are thoughts, you can always add them, and I'm happy to go through them. I want to come to the final point about next week. Are there any last questions or thoughts or reflections for today? Yallah. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Next week, in the Nahjal Balagha book club at this time and this link, inshallah, we are looking at adl, at justice. Not only how is God just, but how do we learn from God's justice to be just in ourselves? We are looking at letter 53 of Nahjal Balagha, which is the letter to Malik al-Ashtar. All of us have heard of this letter. We've heard one or two famous phrases. A person's either your brother in faith or equal in humanity. So famous. We know this letter was framed in the United Nations. We know that this letter was influential in Egypt, in Al-Azhar. We know all these things. But did we actually read the letter front to back? What did the Imam actually say? There are about 8 mini sections to this letter. Read them. Read all of them, inshallah. For in this letter, we understand what does it mean to be just for oneself, for Allah, and in general, what is the quality of justice? I'm now sending in the chat a link to this letter. Click it, inshallah. Read it. And next week, if you have any thoughts about this letter, come and we will discuss them. But the theme for next week is Adl, justice of God and justice in humanity in light of Nahjal Balagha. If, by the way, you have questions about politics, which will come up, you can bring them, about how should a ruler be and how do we take just and fair political stances today. If you wish, and if you read it, we can go in that direction, but we will see. Okay, that's everything from me. Thank you so much, inshallah, for your attention, for listening, and for your questions. I will see you next week, inshallah, at this time to go through letter 53 of Nahjal Balagha in this, the Nahjal Balagha book club. Thank you, everyone. Take care, inshallah. Ma'asalam. Khuda Hafiz. Thank you so much, brother.